Half a year, 183 days if you counted the old way. Here, in the concrete gut of the facility under Nevada, days blurred into one endless cycle of training, tests, and waiting. The smell remained the same: ozone from the air purification systems, overheated metal from the server rooms, machine oil from the technical bays, and fear. A thin, almost imperceptible but constant scent of fear from the techs and analysts who tried not to meet my gaze in the corridors. They didn't see Sergeant Barkley and me, but Project Lycanthrope, a valuable asset, a weapon, a monster. I pushed myself on the range and in the simulators until I was completely exhausted. Transformation had become almost second nature. A click and claws ripped the air. Another click, and I was back in my weak, vulnerable human shell. Control was almost absolute. The beast inside no longer clawed its way out at every flash of light or sudden sound. It had become quieter, more cunning. It hadn't vanished. It had simply merged with me. Now, it wasn't a separate voice of rage, but a constant backdrop of instinct. Assessing distance to potential threats, analyzing sense for hostility, a persistent low thrum of battle hunger in my blood. Human emotions, compassion, doubt, even anger seemed faded like old photographs. Only duty, predator's instinct, and weariness remained. I took out the dictaphone less and less often. It was becoming harder to speak. Words jumbled, seeming like a meaningless string of sounds compared to growls or howls, which conveyed my state more accurately. The recordings became shorter, more fragmented. Recording 112, training, normal, control stable, hunger present, awaiting orders. That was it. What else was there to say? That with each passing day I felt less like Aiden Barkley? That sometimes the reflection in polished steel looked alien? The last 6 months had passed in a strange lull. After our raids in Montana, Arizona, Louisiana, and the Appalachians, the hungry cult had seemingly vanished. Analysts theorized the network was shattered, leaders destroyed, followers dispersed. But I felt it was a lie. It was the drawing of a breath before a leap. They hadn't disappeared. They were lying low, preparing something new. Something worse than Wendigos, dogmen, and even the Mist Father. The beast inside was taut as a string, waiting for the signal to hunt. And the signal came. A summons to the briefing room in the middle of a standard test cycle. Lieutenant Colonel Cross was waiting for me there, alone, without analysts or piles of paper. Just him, the table, the dark wood panels, and a large tactical screen on the wall, still dark. Tension hung in the air, different from the usual sterile atmosphere of the facility. Thick, almost palpable. The ozone smell here was sharper, like before a storm. Cross sat motionless. His granite profile was carved from the shadows of the room. Cold blue eyes met mine without a trace of emotion. But I caught something new in them. A barely perceptible change. Not anxiety, no. More like anticipation. As if he, too, had been waiting for this moment. "Sergeant Barkley." His voice was even, as always, but I heard a barely perceptible tremor in it. "The lull is over. We have a new contact." He pressed a button on a remote. The screen came alive, showing a satellite image. A white, endless nothing. Snow, ice, rare rocky outcrops. The far north. The screen showed an inhospitable landscape somewhere on the border of the Yukon and Canada's Northwest Territories. The White Silence, as writers called it. A place where nature was unforgiving. And man was merely a transient, unwelcome guest. Cross zoomed in, focusing on a chain of rocky hills cutting across the snowy plain. "Several weeks ago, our systems intercepted a weak but persistent energy surge here. Cross indicated a spot in the center of the image with a laser pointer. The area is virtually uninhabited. The nearest permanent settlement is 300 miles to the south. But old legends of local tribes, the Athabascans and Inuit, mention this place. They call it the Valley of the Sleeping Fang. He switched the image. Scans of old ethnographic records, drawings made by early explorers, appeared on the screen. Images of a giant wolf, so massive that mountains seemed like hills to it. It was called by many names: Amarok, the ice wolf, spirit of the great cold. Legends said it was an embodiment of destruction, a primal force of winter that sleeps beneath the ice, but will one day awaken to devour the world. Most records attributed this to mythology, common folklore of the northern peoples. But after the Wendigos, Dogmen, and the Mist Father we knew, there was a kernel of truth in every legend, a monstrous truth. The signature was unstable but similar to those we'd detected before incidents linked to the Hungry, Cross continued. We sent an agent there for reconnaissance, a solo mission, maximum stealth. Agent Raven, one of our best specialists for operations in extreme environments. A dossier appeared on the screen. A photo of a middle-aged man with a weathered face and intelligent, weary eyes. His service record was impressive. 3 days ago, Raven made contact. The last time... Cross's voice hardened. He played an audio recording. Through the static, a strained whisper broke through. Base. Old. They found it. Not a myth. The totem. Key. They want to wake it. God, it's huge. Like. Followed by a sharp sound of struggle. An indistinct growl like an animal's. A cry, and then silence. Only the wind's howl and static. The recording cut out. A heavy silence hung in the room. Nothing since. Cross turned off the recording. Attempts to contact him have been unsuccessful. We believe Agent Raven is either dead or captured, and the Hungry cult is close to completing their ritual. He looked directly into my eyes. His gaze was like a drill. Your mission, Sergeant. Deploy immediately to the designated area. Locate the cult's base. Assess the scale of the threat. Rescue Agent Raven if possible. The primary objective: prevent the awakening of the entity the legends call Amarok at all costs. He emphasized the last words: prevent. Not neutralize after awakening, as with the others. Apparently, the analyst believed this creature was on a completely different threat level. The beast within me stirred. The mention of a giant wolf, an ancient spirit of destruction, didn't resonate with fear, but with primal animal curiosity. A challenge, a recognition of an equal player on this bloody chessboard. The battle hunger that had slept for the past 6 months awoke and demanded its due. Your gear is prepped. Transport is waiting. You deploy in 1 hour, Cross concluded. I nodded. Words were unnecessary. A new hunt had begun, and this time it led into the heart of an icy hell, toward a nightmare from ancient legends. The transfer was swift and silent like all command operations. First, a stealth transport plane without markings, taking off from a secret airfield in Nevada and setting a course directly north. Then, landing on an equally unremarkable snow-covered airstrip somewhere in the Canadian wilderness. The cold hit my face the moment the hatch opened. Sharp, clean, biting Arctic air after the climate-controlled atmosphere of the facility. 2 heavy-duty military off-road vehicles were waiting for us, already warmed up and ready for the march. And a support team. 5 soldiers in Arctic camouflage, their faces almost entirely hidden by masks and tactical goggles. They were commanded by Captain Davis, a solid man with a hard gaze who immediately made it clear he was in charge, despite my specificity. They were professionals, I could feel it. But in their eyes, when they looked at me, I read a mix of curiosity, distrust, and poorly concealed fear. They knew the Project Lycanthrope protocols. They knew what I was. The journey was long and grueling. First on icy remnants of old logging roads, then along barely visible winter trails, and finally, simply cross-country, navigating by GPS and maps. The landscape outside the vehicle windows was monotonous and hypnotizing. Endless snow-covered plains, sparse stands of stunted northern spruces, ice-bound lakes and rivers. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the snow in cold pink and lilac hues, but offering no warmth. Civilization was left far behind. Only wind, snow, and cold reigned here. After 2 days of travel, we reached the point where the off-road vehicles became useless. Beyond lay an area of hills and canyons passable only by snowmobiles. They had been delivered in advance and hidden in a camouflaged snow shelter. 5 powerful army models designed for extreme conditions. We transferred the gear, checked our weapons. My Luciferin 13 silver blades felt cold against my thigh even through several layers of clothing. The FNX 45 pistol felt familiar in my hand. I decided not to take a rifle. In close combat, which was likely ahead, it would only be a hindrance. My claws and fangs were more reliable. We moved on, the roar of the snowmobile engines tearing through the pristine silence. The wind whipped icy grit into my face. The snowy wilderness seemed endless. The GPS navigators worked worse and worse, the signal becoming intermittent. We were approaching the valley of the Sleeping Fang, an anomalous zone. I felt it not only by the equipment malfunctions. The air here was different. Denser, more tense, as if the earth itself held its breath. And I began to sense it. A subtle scent, almost imperceptible to a human nose, but distinct to me. The smell of ancient cold, of ozone like silver, but much more potent, and sleeping power. A vast, monstrous power, slumbering somewhere beneath that white blanket. The beast inside growled low, gutturally. It recognized that scent, the scent of an alpha, the scent of an enemy. The sky blackened abruptly. Just an hour ago, it had been clear, frosty, with a low northern sun. Now it was covered by heavy leaden clouds, racing at incredible speed. The wind howled, turning from merely strong into a hurricane-force gale. Snow fell like a wall, not fluffy flakes, but a dense, blinding curtain of tiny ice needles, which whipped across my face and worked their way under my clothes. A blizzard had begun. A true Arctic blizzard, a white hell that polar explorers talk about. Visibility dropped to 0. We moved almost by touch, barely making out each other's silhouettes several feet away. The snowmobiles roared, trying to push through the drifts, which were piling up at a terrifying rate. The wind tossed us from side to side. One of the snowmobiles stalled, its engine choked on the icy dust. The soldier driving it desperately tried to start it, but in vain. A second snowmobile bogged down in a deep drift. "Stop! Everyone halt!" shouted Captain Davis, shouting over the wind's howl. "We can't go on! We'll get lost and freeze! Set up shelter, wait!" He was right from a human survival standpoint. But I wasn't human, and I knew waiting was not an option. That weak but rising hum of ritual energy, which I now clearly felt through the blizzard's wail, told me the cultists hadn't stopped their work. They were somewhere near, under the protection of their base, and they were getting closer to their goal. Every hour of delay could be fatal. "I'm going on." My voice sounded hoarse and muffled through my mask. Davis turned sharply to me. Through the blowing snow, I saw his eyes, narrowed with surprise and anger. "Are you insane, Sergeant? In this weather? You won't make it a mile. It's suicide." "We don't have time to wait, Captain." I shook my head. The ritual is ongoing. I have to stop them. Is that an order? He asked, his voice turning icy. It's a necessity, I replied. You stay here. Try to fix the equipment. Wait for the weather to improve. If I don't return in... I estimated the time. 12 hours. Consider the mission failed and pull out. I didn't wait for his answer. I shed some of my gear, keeping only an assault pack with the essentials. Ammo for the FNX-45, silver blades, a compact first aid kit, a signal beacon, and a satellite communicator. I stepped several feet away from the group, feeling their tense, frightened stares on me. And then I let the transformation happen. The pain was familiar by now, but in this icy hell, it felt different, like a release. The human body, constricted by frost and bulky clothing, was replaced by the powerful, thickly furred, dark gray body of the beast. Claws bit into the hardened snow, providing secure footing. The wind no longer felt hostile, it merely ruffled my fur. The cold vanished, replaced by an internal heat. Heightened senses pierced the white gloom of the storm, distinguishing landmarks invisible to humans. Subtle changes in the scent of the snow, vibrations of the ground beneath my paws, the faint, distant hum of the ritual. I turned and, without looking back at the soldiers frozen in their tracks, plunged into the heart of the storm. A lycanthrope's run is not a human run. It's a flight above the ground, powerful thrusts of the paws, a speed unthinkable for an ordinary being. I raced through the howling blizzard, driven by instinct, duty, and the dark call of the ancient wolf sleeping beneath the ice. The storm was my cover, and my element. The blizzard howled and raged for several more hours, testing my endurance, but I felt no weariness. The beast inside exulted at this primal fury of the elements, at the speed, at the awareness of my own strength in the face of icy chaos. I ran, orienting myself by a barely perceptible vibration in the air, a low-frequency hum emanating from the ritual. It grew stronger and stronger, guiding me like an invisible beacon. Gradually, the wind began to subside, the curtain of snow thinned. I burst out of the thick shroud of the storm and found myself on the edge of an abyss. Before me yawned a deep, winding canyon, whose rocky walls were capped with snow and hung with gigantic icicles, glittering in the rays of the low sun piercing through the clouds. Below, at the bottom of the canyon, it was darker, quieter. The wind here howled differently, a low, drawn-out sound, like the lament of a trapped spirit. I descended the steep slope, clinging with my claws to the ice-covered rocks. The snow at the bottom of the canyon was denser, but not untouched. I immediately saw tracks. Several clear snowmobile tread prints, fresh, left no more than a few hours ago. The cultists had been here. And next to them, other tracks. Huge oval paw prints with deep claw marks. Wolf tracks. But their size was incredible. Each one, like a dinner plate. And strangest of all, they didn't always press evenly into the snow. Some were deep, others barely noticeable, as if the beast that left them wasn't entirely material, or its weight was shifting. Ghostly tracks of Amarok, or his servants. I followed the trail, keeping to the shadow of the cliffs. The canyon narrowed, winding like a snake. The smell of the ritual, ozone, blood, unfamiliar spicy incense, and beneath it all, the soul-chilling scent of an ancient predator, was becoming almost unbearable. And then around another bend I saw it, the base. It was plastered against a rock overhang, almost blending with the stone. A small, squat concrete structure, no frills. A few narrow slit windows, a heavy steel door, a ventilation pipe from which thin gray smoke curled. It looked like an abandoned geological survey station or a Cold War-era border post which the cult had adapted for their needs. A faint yellow light burned in a couple of windows. No signs of life around, but I felt them. Several people inside, and something else. Something inhuman. Near the entrance stood a single snowmobile dusted with fresh snow. Nearby, the same giant wolf tracks were visible, leading to the door and back out, deeper into the canyon. As if a giant wolf was guarding this place. Or was its prisoner? I had to act fast and quietly. Time was pressing. The hum of the ritual was building, becoming almost palpable. They were close to their goal. The hunt was entering its final stage. I took cover behind a large boulder, watching the base. For about 10 minutes, I just lay still, blending with the shadows and the snow, allowing my heightened senses to scan the surroundings. The smoke from the pipe, the faint light in the windows, the smell of cooking food, something simple like stew, mixed with the stench of unwashed bodies and ritual incense. No movement outside, but I heard them inside. Raised voices, footsteps on the concrete floor, a door creaking, and a quiet, barely audible whimper. Not human, like a dog's, but somehow wrong, full of pain and fear. Perhaps Agent Raven wasn't the only prisoner. I decided not to storm the main entrance. Too risky. Circling the structure, I found a small, barred basement-style window on the rear side, almost completely buried in snow. The bars were old, rusted. I approached closer, trying not to make noise. Stale air and that same strange whimpering drifted from the window. One tug with a clawed paw, and the rusted metal didn't hold. The bars bent open with a dull screech. I squeezed through the narrow opening and dropped onto the cold concrete floor of the basement. It was dark here, smelling of damp, mold, and animal cage. In the corner, in the light of my night vision, I saw it. A cage of thick steel bars, and inside, a creature. Wolf-like, but wrong. Fur matted, missing in places, exposing gray skin. Eyes cloudy, milky. One paw unnaturally twisted. The creature whimpered softly, trembling all over. Could this be one of Amarok's servants? Or a failed cult experiment? Suddenly, footsteps sounded from above. 2. They were coming down the stairs into the basement. I darted into the darkest corner, behind old shelving piled with junk. The door creaked open, and 2 cultists entered the basement, in dirty winter gear, armed with shotguns. They carried a bucket of some slop. "Doesn't eat well, the damn thing," one grumbled, kicking the cage. "The high priest said if it doesn't recover by the ritual, feed it to the main one." "What does it matter?" the second replied. "Soon everything will change. Amarok will awaken and we will gain power." They didn't finish. I sprang from the shadows like a demon. The first strike of a silver blade slit one's throat. The second cultist raised his shotgun, but I was faster. A paw swipe broke his arm, a second blade went under his ribs. It was over in a couple of seconds. Silent, deadly. The ozone smell mixed with the scent of blood and fear. I examined the bodies. Ordinary people, fanatics with mad gleams in their eyes. Nothing special. I approached the cage. The wolf inside huddled in the corner, whimpering even more piteously. In its cloudy eyes, I saw no malice. Only pain and fear. I easily tore the lock from the cage. The wolf didn't bolt. It merely shuffled away, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. An experiment, a sacrifice, I didn't know, but I didn't kill it. I climbed the stairs to the main level of the base. The corridors were dimly lit by emergency lamps. Silence. But I heard them. In a room further down, like a laboratory. Several people. And a hum. the hum of the ritual coming from below. The laboratory turned out to be a mix of old and new. Rusty centrifuges and autoclaves from the Cold War era sat alongside modern computers and DNA analysis equipment. On the tables, beakers with murky liquids, tissue samples, reports with the hungry symbols, and signs of a struggle. An overturned chair, bloodstains on the floor, broken equipment. Raven had been held here. On one of the tables, I found it, the agent's communicator, broken, but the memory card was intact. I slipped it into my back pocket. Later, if there is a later. In the far corner of the laboratory, I discovered an entrance to a shaft, not just a hatch, a heavy steel watertight door like on a submarine or in a bunker. Nearby, a control panel smashed. The door was slightly ajar, a couple of inches. Apparently, the cultists weren't overly concerned with security, confident in their isolation. Or something had made them hurry. Warmth seeped from the gap. Not the natural heat of the Earth's core, but a dry, pulsating heat, mixed with the smell of ozone, blood, and something else, like burning resin. And the hum. A low, vibrating hum, which I felt not only with my hearing but with my whole body. It came from below. I forced the heavy door open and squeezed inside. Beyond it, a vertical shaft began, with an emergency metal ladder descending into the darkness. The air was heavy, charged with the energy of the ritual. The walls of the shaft were covered in a layer of something gleaming, like solidified amber or resin, and runes. They glowed distinctly here, pulsing in time with the low hum. I began the descent. The ladder was slick with condensation and that same amber substance. The hum grew louder with every foot, and then the ground beneath my feet trembled. The first tremor, not strong, but noticeable. Rock dust and pieces of amber rained down from above. The sound came from below, a dull, powerful thud, as if something vast had shifted in its sleep. Amarok. He felt the ritual's climax approaching. He was awakening. I sped up the descent, skipping several steps. Falling held no fear. A lycanthrope's body could withstand it. Being late was the fear. The shaft branched out, but the main source of the hum and energy was obvious. It came from the very lowest level. The walls around became stranger and stranger. Stone was interspersed with veins of translucent amber, within which frozen shadows were visible. Vague outlines of some creatures, bones, plants, as if the mountain itself was a tomb for ancient nightmares. Finally, the ladder ended. I dropped onto the floor of a huge cavern. The air here vibrated with power. Ahead, in the flickering light of pulsing runes and ritual braziers, I saw it. The center of the ritual, the heart of the mountain, and the heart of the beast. The cavern was colossal, a natural cavity, enlarged and modified. By whom? Nature? Ancient civilizations? Or the cult itself? The vaults were lost in the darkness above. The walls shimmered with amber veins, in which were frozen the ghostly shadows of the past. The air was thick, electrified, smelling of ozone, blood, and antiquity. And in the center of the hall, stood it, a cube, a gigantic cube of translucent golden material, like amber, but vibrating with its own energy. It glowed faintly from within, and this light pulsed in time with the low hum filling the cavern. And inside the cube, curled in a ball, it slept. Amarok, the ice wolf. He was unimaginably huge. Even in sleep, curled up, he filled most of the cube. His fur wasn't white, but the color of pure ice, frostily transparent, sparkling with myriads of cold lights. Beneath it, mighty muscles and bones the size of ancient trees were discernible. Fangs, visible from his slightly open maw, were like icy daggers the length of a man. He slept, but his sleep was restless. Paws twitched, eyelids trembled. He felt that awakening was near. Before the amber cube stood a totem, not like those I'd seen before. Not the crude work of fanatics. This was something different. A structure of stone as black as obsidian and interwoven bones of unknown creatures. The totem was covered in complex runes that burned with a bright white light and vibrated so intensely that the air around it shimmered. It was the key, focusing the ritual's energy. Around the totem stood them, the last of the cultists, about a dozen, in ritual robes different from those I'd seen before, more ancient, complex, adorned with bone and fur. At their head stood the high priest, a figure in a wolf skull mask and a mantle of white fur. They chanted a spell in unison in an ancient, guttural language that grated on the ears. Their voices merged with the hum coming from the totem and the amber cube, creating a monstrous symphony of awakening. They were completely absorbed in the process, not noticing the shadow that had slipped from a side tunnel. There was no time for thought. Save Raven, he was either dead or not here. The main thing, stop the ritual, destroy the totem, or try to break the cube. I chose the totem. It was the source of the energy. Without it, the ritual would be interrupted. I lunged forward, a shadow flickering between the braziers. The cultists noticed me too late. The two nearest fell, choking on blood before they could raise their weapons. Some had ritual knives, others strange bone staves. The rest rushed at me with furious cries. The priest in the skull mask raised his hands, and the air around me turned cold, binding my movements with icy fetters. But I broke through. The fight was short and bloody. Silver blades sang their death song. Claws tore flesh. Fangs found throats. The fanatics died with Amarok's name on their lips. The priest's icy fetters weakened with each cultist killed. I fought my way to the totem. The priest stepped towards me, his eyes behind the mask burning with white fire. He shouted a word of power, and a wave of icy energy struck my chest, throwing me back. Pain seared. The cold penetrated to my very bones. I scrambled up, rage washing over me. I saw the priest raising his hands again. But one of the cultists, whom I'd thought dead, suddenly raised his head. His face was covered in blood, but a mad smile played on his lips.
"Fool!" he rasped. "You've only hastened it. The hunger cannot be stopped. He has awakened."
At that same instant, the amber cube shuddered. Cracks spread across its surface, emitting a blinding white light. A deafening crack sounded, like a clap of thunder or a breaking glacier. The hum escalated into a roar. A low, mighty roar that shook the very foundations of the mountain. The amber prison shattered into millions of glittering shards. A blinding light and a wave of freezing cold hit with such force that I was thrown back against the cavern wall, colliding with the amber veins. The air became thin. It was hard to breathe. When my vision returned, I saw him. Amarok stood in the center of the cavern, shaking off the last shards of the amber prison. He wasn't just huge. He was the embodiment of primal power, an element given form. His icy fur glittered like the northern lights. Every hair seemed sharp as a needle. His eyes burned with a steady white light devoid of pupils, pure energy of cold and destruction. Plumes of icy vapor erupted from his maw. He stood on 4 paws, but even so, his shoulders were higher than the ceiling of an average house. He paid no attention to me or the few remaining cultists, writhing in terror. He took a deep breath, and the cavern filled with the sound of a gathering hurricane. And then he let out a howl, not furious, not malicious, but the howl of primal force, freed after 1,000 years' sleep. This howl penetrated bones, froze blood, paralyzed will. It was an echo of times when glaciers and giant beasts ruled the world. And then the destruction began. Amarok didn't attack with intent. He simply moved. A turn of his head, and stone columns crumbled like toothpicks. A paw strike on the floor, and the ground cracked, forming deep fissures. He wasn't an evil genius seeking to destroy the world. He was a natural disaster. A hurricane, an earthquake, an avalanche given flesh and fangs. The cavern vaults began to collapse. Huge boulders rained down, kicking up clouds of dust and amber shards. The totem, the key to the ritual, was swept away by a random swipe of the ice wolf's tail and crumbled to dust. The cultists perished under the collapses, crushed by his paws, frozen by his icy breath. Their cries drowned in the roar of the collapsing mountain. I understood that staying here was certain death. There was no way back. The tunnel I had come through had collapsed among the first. But I saw where the wolf was moving. He was smashing his way through the cavern wall, towards where there was apparently a shorter route to the surface. He wasn't running. He was just walking, and the mountain yielded before him. The decision came instinctively. Insane, but the only possible one. While Amarok hesitated for a moment, breaking through another layer of rock, I surged forward, dodging falling boulders. Using all my lycanthrope strength and agility, I leaped. I landed on his back between his shoulder blades. The fur was stiff as wire and searingly cold. I immediately sank the claws of both paws deep into his hide, trying to hold on. Beneath me was a mountain of moving muscle the size of a locomotive. The wolf seemed not even to notice my presence. He continued to smash his way upward through the mass of rock, leaving a collapsing tunnel in his wake. I just desperately clung on for dear life, thrown by his every step, deafened by the roar of the rockfall and the howl of the element I had unwittingly ridden. The tunnel Amarok had smashed through brought us to the surface, not where I had expected. Not back into the canyon of oblivion, but several miles south, onto an open, snow-covered plateau beneath a grim Arctic sky. The storm had subsided, but the air was heavy, charged with the premonition of something terrible. The ice wolf burst from the mountain's depths like a cork from a champagne bottle, sending up tons of snow and rock. He paused for a moment, shook himself, looked around with his blind white eyes, as if determining direction. And then he let out his deafening, soul-chilling howl again. This howl was different, not just the sound of release, but a battle cry, a summons to destruction. It echoed across the snow-covered expanses, and it seemed to me that even the clouds in the sky froze from it. And he ran. Not walked, but ran asterisk. His movements were fluid, incredibly fast for such a gigantic creature. The ground trembled beneath his paws. Snow flew up from under them in columns, and he ran not north into the uninhabited wilds. He ran south, towards where there was life, towards where chaos could be sown. I barely held on. Each step of the wolf tossed me, threatening to throw me to the ground. I was a flea on the back of a furious god. I had to act. Taking the satellite communicator from my pack, I activated the emergency beacon. The signal went through. Here in the open, away from the anomalous canyon zone, communication worked. With fingers trembling from tension and cold, I dialed the direct line code to the facility. "Cross, come in! This is Barkley. Do you read me?" I shouted, trying to shout over the wind's howl and the thunder of the giant's paws. After a few seconds of static from the speaker, the calm, metallic voice of the lieutenant colonel answered, "Barkley, report. Target Amarok. He's awakened. The ritual was completed. He's free. I gasped for breath. Size, Category 5, possibly higher. I repeat, Category 5 plus. I tried to catch my breath. He's uncontrollable. Pure destruction, and he's heading south, fast, toward populated areas. Coordinates via beacon, requesting immediate response. Understood, Barkley. Cross's voice remained unperturbed. Response authorized. Aviation is already airborne. Your mission is to continue observation, correct fire if possible, and hold on, Sergeant. Just hold on. The connection cut out. Hold on. Easy for him to say. I sank my claws into the icy fur again, feeling the relentless power of the element beneath me, racing south toward an unsuspecting world. I was a scout on the back of the apocalypse, and the race had just begun. Amarok raced south, devouring miles of snow-covered tundra. The ground trembled beneath his colossal paws, and the icy wind, cleaved by his body, whipped my face even through my thick fur. I still clung to his back, trying to hold on while also understanding where he was heading, how to stop him. My claws dug deep into the stiff, searingly cold fur, but every step he took was like a hammer blow, threatening to dislodge me. And then I heard it. A high, cutting sound of jet engines breaking through the wind's howl. I raised my head. 2 predatory dots in the sky, rapidly approaching. F-22 Raptors. Command aircraft. They were coming for an intercept. A soldier's instinct kicked in faster than thought. I was on the back of the primary target, at the epicenter of the coming strike. The protocol was clear. Vacate the danger zone. However tough a lycanthrope's body was, a direct hit from a missile or heavy caliber shell it was unlikely to withstand. I released my claws, tensed, and jumped, a leap from the height of a multi-story building into the blinding white. The wind howled in my ears, the ground rushed up. The impact with the deep snowdrift was hard, knocking the air from my lungs, sending pain through my bones. The snow softened the fall, but didn't negate it. For a moment, the world went black, but regeneration was already doing its work. The pain receded, bones shifted back into place. I scrambled out of the snowdrift, shaking myself off. The beast inside roared with adrenaline. I was whole, and free of my unwilling transport. I looked up just in time to see the fiery streaks of missiles, streaking towards the receding figure of Amarok. Explosions echoed in the frosty air. The wolf's massive body shuddered. He let out an irritated growl, but didn't slow his run. Only black smoking patches remained on his icy hide, quickly sealing over with frost. And then Amarok responded. He raised his head and exhaled a stream of blinding white cold upward. One of the raptors didn't get away. I saw it turn into an ice sculpture and plummet to the ground like a stone. The second fighter sharply climbed into the clouds and vanished. Aviation had been defeated. I plunged after Amarok. Now I wasn't a passenger, but a pursuer. My paws carried me across the snow with incredible speed, but the giant still pulled ahead. I saw his huge tracks, each one like a small crater. I oriented myself by the smell of ozone and cold emanating from him, by the vibration of the ground beneath his steps. Ahead, a valley appeared, cut by an ice-bound river. And on the ice, a line of defense. Tanks, APCs, soldiers. Command hadn't given up. I took a position on the crest of a hill, watching. They opened fire when Amarok came within direct firing range. The cannonade was deafening. Shells struck his icy hide, throwing off sparks but not piercing it. The wolf didn't even pay them any attention. He just walked forward. I saw him crash into the line of tanks. How Abrams tanks flew into the air, crumpled by the blows of his paws. how APCs burst open under his weight, how his icy breath turned vehicles and people into ice statues. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. Steel and gunpowder were powerless against primal might. It was over in minutes. Amarok stepped over the smoking wreckage and ran on south, leaving behind him a field of death and destruction. I watched from the hill, and a cold gripped me from within. A cold not from the frost, but from the realization of the threat's scale. We hadn't just awakened a monster. We had awakened an element, irresistible, invincible to conventional weapons. I clenched my fangs and plunged back into the chase. I didn't know how to stop him, but I had to follow him. I had to try. It was my job, my hunt, my nightmare. The city lights drew nearer. Amarok didn't slow his pace, and I could barely keep up with him, running at the limit of a lycanthrope's speed. The smell of human habitation, exhaust fumes, food, all mixed with the panicked scent of fear, which already hung over the city like a thick cloud. Sirens wailed incessantly, but it was clear not everyone had managed to evacuate. The ice wolf burst into the outskirts, and hell began. I ran through the snowy streets, following him at a distance of several blocks, weaving between abandoned cars and the first rubble. The sounds of collapsing buildings, the thunder of falling structures, the rending shriek of tearing metal mixed with distant screams of terror. Amarok walked down the main street, methodically destroying everything in his path. A paw strike, and the wall of a bank crumbles. A swipe of his tail, and a bus stop flies into the air. Icy breath, and the facade of a theater is covered in frost and crumbles to dust. He wasn't hunting people. He just walked, and the city died around him. It was more terrifying than deliberate malice. It was a blind, relentless force of destruction. I climbed onto the roof of a surviving shopping center to get a better view and avoid being caught in a random collapse. From here, the scene was even more horrific. Amarok was moving toward the city center, towards the tallest buildings, the heart of life. It was at this moment the communicator came alive. Cross's voice sounded strained, almost without his usual icy composure. "Barkley, Agent Raven is alive. They found him." He confirms Amarok is an avatar of destruction drawn to centers of life. He must be stopped at all costs. Reinforcements are already with you. Codename Echo Squad. They have special weaponry. Link up with them and act on their instructions. Rendezvous coordinates: the square in front of City Hall, 2 blocks from your current position. Echo Squad, special weaponry. So Cross did have a plan B after all. Or was it a last-ditch effort? I jumped from the roof and ran towards the designated point, weaving between ruins and the bodies of those who hadn't escaped. Before Cross could finish transmitting the coordinates, I heard them. Not the roar of Army helicopter turbines, but a low, predatory hum, almost inaudible amidst the thunder of the collapsing city. 3 black, angular silhouettes without markings emerged from the low clouds and hovered over the square a couple of blocks from me. Black Hawks? No, something else. More advanced, more sinister. They landed directly on the debris-strewn square with incredible precision. A figure leapt from each helicopter. 3 people in black tactical gear, similar to mine, but more streamlined, futuristic. They moved with inhuman speed and grace, their movements fluid, predatory. They instantly assessed the situation and moved toward me, easily leaping over debris and ruins. I emerged to meet them from behind the wreck of a burned-out bus. As they approached, I could see them clearly. 2 men, 1 woman. Their faces were calm, focused, but in their eyes burned the same yellowish glow as in mine. They weren't ordinary soldiers. The woman, tall, slender, with short cropped dark hair, stepped forward. Sergeant Barkley? Her voice was low, melodious, but with metallic undertones. She handed me a heavy, oblong case made of dark composite material. Lieutenant Colonel Cross's order, protocol, Silver Dawn. This is for you. I opened the case. Inside, on a bed of black cushioning material, lay it. A sword. Two-handed or hand and a half, with a long, wide blade of dull, glowing, silvery metal. It didn't gleam. It glowed with a steady, cold light. The hilt was simple, wrapped in black, rough leather, fitting perfectly in my hand. There was no guard, no ornamentation, just functionality and deadly beauty. The sword felt warm to the touch, despite the surrounding cold, and it vibrated as if alive, as if it recognized me, or the beast inside me. Ripley, the woman introduced herself. Juggernaut, nodded one of the men. Huge, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and scars on his face. Cypher, the second leaner man said quietly, with observant, almost black eyes. And then, before I could say anything, they changed. The transformation was swift, fluid, almost painless to witness. Their bodies contorted, covered in fur. Ripley's dark silver, Juggernaut's almost black, Cypher's ash gray. Their forms were similar to mine, but with individual distinctions. Ripley was leaner, more graceful, but I felt the hidden power of a panther. Juggernaut, massive, bearish, a true engine of destruction. Cypher, lean, tense, like a wolf ready to spring. Ready to...
We are Project Lycanthrope Phase 2, Ripley's voice dropped with growling undertones. She bared her teeth, showing impressive fangs. Improved serum, stable integration, full control. She gestured with a paw towards herself and the other two. Echo Squad, your reinforcements. Welcome to the pack, Sergeant. A pack. For the first time in all this time, I didn't feel like a solitary monster. There were 4 of us. 4 lycanthropes against the ice wolf. The odds were still negligible, but they existed. Amarok felt us, or rather he felt the sword. He stopped wrecking the bank building, slowly turned his giant head, and stared at us with his white, bottomless eyes. There was no recognition in them, only a cold, ancient assessment of a threat. He smelled the silver. He smelled a force capable of harming him. A low, menacing growl rumbled from his fangs, and the air around him shimmered with cold. The ice wolf was preparing for a real battle. The plan is simple, Ripley growled, her silvery eyes tracking the giant's every move.
Juggernaut, you tank him, keep his attention, Cypher. Find weaknesses, call them out. I distract, flank him. Barkley.
She looked at the sword in my hands. Your move is decisive. Strike when you have a chance, and strike true. She didn't wait for an answer. With a low growl, she bolted, turning into a blurred silver streak, and rushed the wolf, weaving between the debris. Juggernaut roared and charged after her, his heavy tread shaking the ground. Cypher stayed slightly behind, his head moving from side to side, as if scanning the wolf not just with his eyes but with some other senses. A dance of death began amidst the ruins of the freezing city. Ripley was incredibly fast. She darted around Amarok's legs, delivering lightning-fast claw strikes, forcing him to distract, to turn. Juggernaut slammed into him with a running start, trying to knock him off his feet or at least slow him down. The impact was like 2 mountains colliding, but the wolf stood firm, only staggering back. He swiped a paw and Juggernaut was thrown aside, smashing through the wall of a half-ruined store, but immediately scrambled up, roaring with rage. Under the left foreleg, an old wound, sealed with ice, but the structure is compromised. Cypher's voice sounded not in my ears, but directly in my head. Telepathy? Another Phase 2 enhancement? Amarok roared and a wave of icy mist struck the square. I barely managed to leap back, feeling the cold sear my fur.
Ripley and Juggernaut also dodged. Now, Barkley, attack! Cypher's voice in my head again. I lunged forward. The sword in my hands felt light, an extension of my own claws. I felt its hum, its thirst. Amarok turned to face me. His maw gaped open, preparing to unleash another blast of cold. But I was faster. I slipped under his guard, and the sword blade described a glittering arc. The blow landed exactly where Cypher had indicated, under the left foreleg. The sword entered the icy hide with a hiss and a screech. Amarok howled. This time his voice held pain. Not just irritation, but real, deep pain. The wound didn't seal over with frost. It smoked with black vapor, and dark, icy fluid spurted from it. The silver worked. It caused him agony. The wolf recoiled, trying to swat me with a paw or tail. But now we acted as a single unit. Juggernaut attacked him from the front again, distracting him. Ripley flanked him from the other side, her claws tearing at the tendons on his hind leg. Cypher continued to guide my strikes, pointing out momentarily appearing weak points in the giant's defense. The battle was furious, chaotic. We circled the ice wolf like a pack of real wolves around a cornered mammoth. He responded with blows of monstrous force, his icy breath freezing everything around him. Juggernaut was thrown back again, and this time he couldn't get up immediately, one of his paws unnaturally twisted. Ripley sustained a deep gash on her side from a random tail swipe. Cypher, though unharmed, couldn't fight in close combat. But we didn't back down. Amarok was wounded, enraged but still incredibly powerful. He understood that we were the main threat. He focused his attack on me, on the wielder of the silver sword. He tried to crush me, freeze me, seize me in his gigantic jaws. I dodged, parried blows with the sword, delivered counterstrikes. Every wound left by the silver weakened him, but slowly. Too slowly. He was still capable of destroying us all. Juggernaut was severely wounded. Ripley was bleeding heavily. Cypher, though unharmed, couldn't fight in close combat. His heart! Cypher's voice in my head was strained. Not physical, a core of energy in the center of his chest, but protected by a thick layer of ice and bone. Needs a direct, powerful strike. A chance. One chance. Ripley, overcoming the pain, lunged at the wolf again, clinging to his maw, trying to distract him. Cypher let out a piercing howl which seemed to disorient Amarok for a split second. It was enough. I gathered all my strength, all the beast's fury, all the man's will. I felt the sword in my hands heat up, vibrate with new power. I leaped. High, using the building debris as a springboard. I soared over the wolf's head and plunged down, aiming the sword precisely at the center of his massive chest. The blade entered with a deafening crack of breaking ice and the screech of metal on bone. I felt it punch through the defense, how it reached something. Pulsing. Warm? No, on the contrary, a source of absolute cold, the heart of winter. Amarok froze. His white eyes widened, and for a moment, something akin to surprise flickered in them. And then he let out a final howl. It was different from the previous ones. There was no fury or threat in it. Only infinite cosmic sorrow and the cold of fading. His body began to disintegrate, not into flesh and blood, but into myriads of snowflakes and ice crystals. He settled, melted, turning into a gigantic snowdrift which immediately began to evaporate even in the freezing air, leaving behind only a wet patch on the ruined square and a feeling of absolute emptiness. The ice wolf was gone, melted away like a nightmare at dawn. Silence. A dead, deafening silence after the roar of battle and the giant's howl. We stood amidst the ruins, breathing heavily. 4 lycanthropes, victors. I looked at my hands. The sword was still there, but its glow had faded. It was just a piece of cold metal again. Nearby, Ripley helped a groaning juggernaut get up. Cypher stood motionless a little ways off, looking at the spot where Amarok had just been, his face inscrutable. We survived. We won. But at what cost? And what awaited us next? The thrum of SOCOM helicopters brought us back to reality. They landed directly in the square, kicking up swirls of snow and dust. Medics immediately attended to the wounded juggernaut, loading him onto a stretcher. Ripley, holding her injured side, watched them with a grim expression. Cypher approached me. "Good job, Barkley," he said softly. "You handle that sword well." There was no mockery in his dark eyes, rather, a statement of fact. We boarded one of the helicopters. The journey back to the facility passed in silence. I looked out the porthole at the ruins of the city passing below, at the dark forests and snow-covered plains. The war was far from over. Amarok was just one branch of the hunger, albeit the most powerful we had faced. The hungry cult, even having lost their priests here, likely had other cells, other plans. But something had changed. I looked at Ripley, Juggernaut, and Cypher. They were the same as me, creations of Project Lycanthrope, weapons, monsters. But they were a pack. My pack. For the first time since my transformation, the icy ring of solitude around me had cracked. I was no longer a one-of-a-kind horror, doomed to an endless solitary hunt. "Is Cross satisfied?" I asked Ripley. She smirked, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. "Cross is always satisfied when his toys function properly, especially when they exceed expectations." She paused, then added quietly, "But don't expect gratitude from him. To him, we're just expendable. More effective than the old ones, but still." She didn't finish, but I understood. "Phase 2, Cypher said, staring into the void. "Stable integration, improved regeneration, group PSI link. But the cost remains the same." He touched his temple, and I knew he wasn't just talking about physical scars. The facility greeted us with its usual sterility and the smell of ozone. But this time, I walked the corridors not alone. The presence of Ripley, Cypher, and even the wounded Juggernaut, who was taken to the medical bay, changed the perception of this place. It was still a cage, a laboratory, an armory. But now it was a cage for a pack. Our den. The debriefing with Cross was predictably brief. He sat at his desk, as always unperturbed. He reviewed the reports, nodded. "The Amarok threat is neutralized. Echo Squad demonstrated high combat effectiveness. Analysis of data recovered from Agent Raven and the cult base is ongoing. New objectives will be determined shortly." He raised his cold eyes to us. "Sergeant Barkley, your integration with the group is deemed successful. You are officially transferred to Echo Squad. Congratulations." Not a word about casualties, not a word about the ruined city, not a word about the price we pay, just a transfer, a new line in the personnel file of a weapon. Later, in my bunk, I took out the sword. I placed it on the table. It lay there, dimly reflecting the light, a reminder of the battle, of Amarok's cold, of my new role. I approached the one-way mirror. A weary human face looked back at me. But the eyes, the yellow glow in them burned brighter. And now it wasn't just the beast's rage or the soldier's weariness. Something else had appeared in it. A shadow of grim determination, and the gleam of a strange, predatory brotherhood. The hunger hadn't gone away. It would always be with me. The scar of the moon would remain on my soul forever. But now I didn't carry it alone. The war continued. New monsters waited in the dark. New orders would come soon. But now I had a pack. We were weapons. We were monsters. But we were together. And that changed everything or nothing. time would tell. For now, wait and be ready for the next hunt.